Um, okay, welcome back. This is going to post late at night. Might throw some people off. So I went late tonight because, of course, I have to wait until after hockey games are done to go to a movie. Watched Evil Dead Rise, so I had to wear my Boomsticks jersey. Or Boomstick. Yeah, no, Boomsticks. Yeah. So Ash from Ash versus Evil Dead movies. I don't know where to start. First off, if you are a horror connoisseur and you're like, I don't know, I'm on the fence about whether or not I want to watch Evil Dead Rise, if you can handle a lot of blood, if you can handle um just wow. I had heard that it was slow to get started, but once it gets started, it's really intense. I yeah, I mean, I guess there's, but I mean, you have to have the introductory part. If you want to call that slow, okay, but to me it seemed pretty breakneck in its pace. Uh wow. so I'm not going to get into spoilers yet, but I will need to. I may need to discuss this with a psychiatrist at some point. You know, for me with horror movies, I remember when I was a kid and I had a lot of phobias. I had a lot of phobias. So I had to cure myself of some phobias. And I felt like with horror movies, it was me testing myself. It was, testing my limits. So I'd watch horror movies, usually late at night at a friend's house. We'd have slumber parties, sleepovers, whatever you want to call them. And horror movies were very often on in the plans. And we would watch like two or three in a row. You could line up Friday the 13th. You could line up Nightmare on Elm Street movies, Hellraisers. The basically almost everything in the 80s. It felt like there were a lot of sequels for, which happens with horror movies. They're cheap to make, but it was one of those things where after I would watch a horror movie, I would feel like I don't know. I felt like I had done something, like I had survived through something that maybe other people might not, especially when I remember the first time I watched the original Nightmare on Elm Street, and I watched it with a guy who was kind of a jock type. Um, kind of, he was very athletic and really tough guy, and the movie terrified him. He he was absolutely horrified, and his mother told my mother that he didn't sleep for like a week after he watched it. I slept like a baby, so I realized that it was one area in which I could handle some of this. Like I'm able to differentiate between, this is just a movie. I can suspend my disbelief so it doesn't really bother me. The torture movies like Hostel, some of the Saw stuff, not a lot of the Saw stuff. I don't feel like Saw is as bad, but yeah, the Hostel movies put me off. Terrifier and Terrifier 2 kind of put me off a bit too, which is too bad because I want to like Art the Clown. I've already talked about that in videos, but the Evil Dead movies. I remember when I watched the original, and I didn't sleep very well that night, but it became sort of the measuring stick for me when it came to horror movies. That was the horror movie. It was like, okay, every movie was compared to that for gore and for just the level of what in the is going to happen next, right? This movie tonight, yeah, it has a lot of that going for it. There were a lot of moments in this movie where I was like, what are you doing? So it does have people doing stupid things because people have to do stupid things in order for a horror movie to happen. They have to make wrong decisions. They have to be not very clear thinking, which makes sense, right? This is a scenario your relative is a demon. You're not ready for that kind of thing. And so it's frustrating to watch from a movie perspective, but it's probably more realistic that people in that situation don't know how to act. They don't act rationally. They don't do the right things. And that's absolutely to me something that I understand, and I would probably feel the same way. So with Evil Dead Rise, it's in the city, and it's in a rundown apartment building. It doesn't do what I now when I originally heard about Evil Dead Rise, I thought, wow, they're gonna take this into the city. You could go bonkers. So in one of the Evil Dead video games, they had the book being read on TV, Book of the Dead being read on TV, and so it's everywhere. And you got to go out and because it's a video game, of course, you got to off all these demons, and they're everywhere, and you're all over the streets. And the games were pretty good. If somebody out there watching this hasn't played them, they're pretty good. Most Evil Dead video games are pretty good. But I kind of hope for something like that, where maybe a city block would have a bunch of people, right? And it would just be chaos. We don't get that. It still is claustrophobic, which is very, very true to the Evil Dead brand. The only exception would be the Army of Darkness movie, which of course boomsticks, and it's where it gets kind of campy and ridiculous, as Sam Raimi took it mainstream. And then of course you get the Ash versus Evil Dead series. This seems to exist in the same universe, and so there's been talk of doing other Evil Dead movies. The expectation is they'll make one probably every 2 or 3 years. At least that's what they're hoping to do. If they can be this good, do it. I say, you know what? Do it. Great, great idea. Perfect, fantastic. Do it. Um, it's hard to figure out where do I start when I'm reviewing this movie. If you're wondering why my wife isn't reviewing it with me, she was not going. I went with my friend Kimber. I took the boys. Um, I think Malachi was pretty terrified the whole time. That was pretty intense. Gabriel, I think, did pretty well. I think for Malachi, it might be a tough night for sleep for him. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of stuff that happens in this movie, and they hadn't even seen the trailer before we went and saw it, which is great, because they didn't know what was going to happen, and wow. So if you're wondering, if you're still wondering at this point, yeah, I recommend this. I recommend this. I cannot recommend this enough. This movie was, again, if you like Evil Dead movies, this to me was excellent. And I've watched part of the Red Letter Media um, review of it. I only watched the first like 5 minutes because I didn't want to hear a lot. And I know Jay was like okay with it, and Mike enjoyed it. I this this movie, and before I'd even went to see it tonight, I pre-ordered it on Amazon. So next month I will have it. I will watch it again. I don't know how many times I'm going to watch it, but it could be 5 or 6 times. The 2013 Evil Dead, I ended up watching a bunch. So, all right, if you don't want spoilers, you can go off now. I would recommend this movie. Honestly, I think if you experience it in the theater, I think you get the visceral experience. I kind of feel like that's how this is meant to be seen. So I'm glad that, last year there was rumors that this was just going to be digital. So it would just be released on streaming services and it wasn't going to be in theaters. I am so glad they decided to do this in theaters. I am so glad that I found time to watch this movie. I even watching the hockey game tonight between Vegas and Edmonton, all I kept thinking was, this can't go to overtime because I want to get to the movie. So this can't go to overtime. And it didn't. I was so happy because the movie start time was at 10:10 by the time I was done the recap of that game. I don't know, about 8:30, 45. And I like to be there early too for the movies. I'm kind of a nerd that way. I like to be there and get through all the previews and everything. And I like to have time to, stand in line and not feel like we're rushed. We're rushed. I don't like last minute getting to the movies. But again, if you like Evil Dead movies, I really think you'll like this movie. So you start off with Beth. You're introduced to Beth. She is a guitar technician, so at concerts kind of thing, in clubs. And her sister Ellie refers to her as a groupie, which is a very different thing, right? And at the start of the movie, you see clearly she's taking a pregnancy test, which means she has to be pregnant. They're not going to show you that in the movie unless she's pregnant. Now, they don't show the result, right? Until later on you find out. So, again, if you don't want spoilers, this is a good time to turn the video off. Final warning. All right. Now, before we get to Beth, we see like a camp set up, like at a lake and a cabin, which is your standard setting for these movies usually. And there's a girl who's not feeling well, Jessica, and her friends are, whatever. And so they do the spirit coming through, the evil demonic spirit coming through the woods over the water, same as in the other Evil Dead movies, but it's a fake out. And I knew right away, I was like, this is a fake out because Demon hasn't been released yet. At least that's what I thought, right? And so it turns out it's a drone. And so guy says, well, don't have to worry about it, although the blades will cut your face. And I'm like, and I said to Kimber, I said, so somebody's face is getting cut with the blades because they just set that up. And there's a lot of that. And so it's a horror movie trope, and it's a good one that you set up all of these sight gags, if that's the right terminology, where you'll see like there's a scene where a pair of scissors get thrown and they end up underneath the bed. And I again said those are going to come into play later. There's the remote that doesn't open the door very well to the garage underneath the apartment building, and I thought that's coming into play later. And it's okay that horror movies telegraph this. I've always been okay with horror movies telegraphing this. Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, they all do that. The original Evil Dead does that too, right? Where there's a something happens, and you're like, okay, they're gonna come back to that. If a character has a fear in a horror movie, that's so going to be used to either psychologically torment them or they're going to die that way, right? So we see these people at the cabin, and the one girl who wasn't feeling well, she's clearly possessed, and so she murders these two others that are at the lake, and then it goes right to Beth, who's at some bar, and she's in a seedy bathroom, and she's doing the pregnancy test and talking to a guy through the door and all of that fun stuff. And um, yeah, and then it transitions to this rundown apartment building, where her sister, so Beth's sister, is there with her three kids. And coming into this, I thought, okay, so the mother gets possessed, and this movie's gonna be about Beth's trying to save the kids. Yes and no. Yeah, yes, and kind of really no. So you've got this setup now where Beth's with Ellie, and then the kids decide they're going out for pizza. So the oldest kid is able to drive, so drives out, and then we get like an earthquake. And the earthquake opens up this hole in the basement, and of course, Danny, one of the kids, goes down into this hole in the floor and finds there's a vault, and of course finds the Book of the Dead. Although it's different in this movie, and it's different because there are three books of the dead. I am so excited about this idea that there are multiple books of the dead. Maybe they do different things. Maybe together they do something else, right? Clearly, this was a. It's very very similar, but there are some differences. This Book of the Dead didn't have a bunch of writing in it. It was just basically drawings, and it had teeth on the side of it. And so, if you try prying it open, you're going to cut yourself. And of course, if the blood is taken in by the book, that wakes up the book. And I know that from the 2013 Evil Dead, he pricks his finger on the barbed wire, and the blood hits the book, and the book soaks it up. And then he reads from the book, and him reading from the book summons the demon. But the idea is that once that blood hits the book, you're already in trouble. And this is something that is part of the mythology. So, of course, being a moron, because characters have to be morons, gets the Book of the Dead, gets these records as well. The records have the demon incantations on them, and off you go, right? As soon as these incantations are read, then things get ugly. Mom's in the elevator. The interesting thing was that the kids were in the elevator after the earthquake, and the mother says, don't go in an elevator after an earthquake. This is a bad idea. Then she has to go downstairs, and she takes the elevator. So the elevator attacks her, as elevators might do. You got to be careful. If your kids got some demon incantation thing going on, take the stairs. Um, and from there, it's just chaos. So she comes back. She's clearly possessed. The last thing she says as herself to her sister is, don't let it take my babies. Her sister sucks at this job. Her sister's terrible at this job of protecting the children, and terrible at just realizing the danger they're in, because she has to be for the plot line to go forward. So I really don't. You know what is funny? I talk about spoilers, and yet I don't want to get into all of the storyline because I want to make sure that for people who watch this who haven't seen it, they're surprised. So I'm gonna skip past some stuff here, just two turns and what happens, and just say that the character of Beth, if they bring her back for another movie, I think that there's enough depth there. And she is pregnant in the movie. She is still pregnant at the end of the movie. There's one kid who survives, and the others don't, which honestly surprised me. And I did have a moment in this movie where I felt like there was a little bit of an inconsistency in terms of who turned, because the idea is that if you get a wound, you turn. But they did some of the gags from old movies too. So if you've watched Evil Dead 2, you know, the eyeball down the throat. They did that. They played the hits. Demons yelling dead by dawn. They did that. They played the hits. In the first movie, when Linda's sitting there cross legged and she's singing to herself while she's playing with her hair, which is a really creepy scene, they do a different version of that in this movie. The mother singing to her child, which was done in the 2013 Evil Dead, they do a version of that in this movie. There are a lot of callbacks. I did feel like there was some dark humor in this. There wasn't as much dark humor as people have inferred from the original Evil Dead movies. I never really thought that the first Evil Dead, the original way back in 1981, I never really thought that movie was funny. I don't remember the first time I watched that laughing a lot. I remember the first time I watched the original Evil Dead thinking that Bruce Campbell's character Ash was the dumbest hero I had ever seen in a horror movie. I was pretty sure he was the stupidest character I'd ever seen, maybe in any movie. And in this one, Beth has some of that at times where it's like, okay, why did you think that worked? Why do you think they're dead right now? Because they're not, and you should know this, but you don't because you don't, and this is dumb. Now, it does get into the full body dismemberment. It does mention that. I would hope that if they go further into the mythology, it introduces the idea there were three priests back in 1923, so 100 years ago, who found this book, and the Catholic Church said, "Yeah, you're not reading that," so they buggered off and they read it anyways. I would hope that they show something with these three because it's not the same setup as in the original Evil Dead. It's not the same voice as in the original Evil Dead doing the Conda Estrada, all that. I'm not going to say the whole thing because I don't want to bring demons back. But the reality is that they've got this opportunity now to really build this mythos out. They do. And I think that this was very well directed. The cinematography was excellent. The practical effects, very well done. Um, there's a part at the end where, for lack of a better term, there's a Voltron sort of thing. I know that sounds weird. I know it does. But I kind of called it. I was like, are they making a Voltron? They are. But they they do this, but you can tell that with a limited budget, it's hard to make a monster not look cheesy or cheap. So they kept the lighting low. You never really see it fully full on in bright light. You just see it in shadows, and that's for the best. This was a movie that understood its limitations. This was a movie that knew how to build suspense and how to keep its audience on its toes. When you realize that the kids aren't safe, the kids aren't off limits. Usually in a horror movie they are. And normally I would be standing here complaining and saying, you know, this movie disrespected some of the rules, but I'm okay with it because it just felt like it was the right call. It was the right call to make, and it definitely added to the air of some unpredictability. The actress who played Beth, absolutely fantastic, did a very good job. The actress who played Ellie, the one that ends up possessed that you see in the trailer, fantastic, absolutely great job. Um, she played that role really well. I'm going to apologize for my voice. We had the live stream today. I've done a lot of talking today, and my voice clearly has decided it's had enough. But the the movie just had no wasted time. there was no point during this movie where I was like, come on, let's get this going. I let's get this started. There are horror movies that do that. There are horror movies that have pacing issues. This didn't have one. Horror movies don't get the kind of respect that I think they should from not just reviewers, but when they're talking about Oscars and everything. I really wish horror movies got more consideration because there's good acting, there's good practical effects, there's good scripts. I think that horror movies right now, when you're looking at movies like X, Pearl, now this Evil Dead Rise, and there are others. There was Hereditary. There are some really good and scary horror movies out there, and creative horror movies out there. And so I think we're kind of in a renaissance for these movies at this time, and I'm happy about it. I'm very happy about it. I had an absolute blast watching this movie. I enjoyed every moment of it. I and I know enjoyed may sound like the wrong terminology, but I mean I was enthralled by it. I was there were moments where I was like, I don't know if I want to look at the screen because something's going to jump out and this is going to terrify me. But at the same time, you soldier through, and it goes back to that feeling I had as a young kid watching horror movies and feeling at the end like I watched that. I did it. I remember the first time I watched an R-rated horror movie, and at the end of it, I was like, I'm all right, cool, because I had always had this thought like, I'm gonna have nightmares. I'm gonna have, and I don't. Generally, if I have nightmares, at least it used to be, years and years back, I would start having nightmares, meaning I had to watch a horror movie and they'd go away. It's the weirdest thing. But I would start having just horrible nightmares. And then I'd watch a couple horror movies and I was fine for months. Now that doesn't really happen anymore. I think I watch so much hockey that it just crams my brain. But it's nice to have these breaks. It's nice, and it's nice to go to a theater where I think now there was me, there was Kimber, there was the two boys, there was four of us. I think there were six other people in the theater because we went to the 10:10 showing on a Monday. It was great. It was great. I really, honestly, and again, you have to have a strong stomach. There were a couple of times in this movie where I said, this person has a lot of blood. They have a lot of blood in them for a person. Do people have that much in general? That's a lot. It just keeps coming. That's a lot, isn't it? Which is an Evil Dead thing. Going back to the first movie, where it's almost comical, where you're like, that's too much. And in the original Evil Dead, the funny thing was Sam Raimi, who wanted to get an R rating, would make it white, green, pink, just all the wrong colors. The weird thing is, it kind of made it creepier. It kind of made the original Evil Dead creepier. Now in this one, they don't do that. The blood's the right color. It's not really the right consistency, but that makes it creepier too. Like it just does. So I would say that again, if you're not if you're not bothered by some of the extreme violence in horror movies, this is absolutely an excellent pick. I don't want to rate it. I tend to give movies sunshiny ratings after I've just watched them. It will change later. I've noticed that even on this channel, I'll rate a movie and then think back a year later and go, it was a good movie, but I probably overrated it there. So I don't want to do that here. But I will say that I still think the 2013 Evil Dead is probably my favorite. And I know that is sacrilege to people who love Evil Dead 2. Evil Dead 2 is right there, but Evil Dead Rise is right there. Like they're very close. I would probably go Evil Dead 2013, Evil Dead 2, and then Evil Dead Rise. And I would probably have Army of Darkness and then the original Evil Dead under that. So that would put it right in the middle, which is excellent because if I'm rating it ahead of Army of Darkness, that's praise. This is based on the Army of Darkness character. It's see, groovy, and 92 because that's the year that Army of Darkness was released. So yeah, blew me away. Absolutely blew me away. I didn't expect it to be as good as it was. I figured it was going to be good, but yeah, right from the very opening, right till the very closing, and it was brilliant how the movie ends where it starts. So the start kind of happens, and then it's like, what just happened there? And then at the end, I was like, oh, okay, all right, fun. So you could, if you're making the next movie, continue from there, or you can bring in the third book, or you can go back to the first book. They could bring Mia back. They could find a way to bring in Ash's daughter from Ash versus Evil Dead. I would be all for that. I would be so excited to see her playing that character again, and to see something done with Pablo and Kelly. I'm just dreaming on that one. I know, but yeah, this is definitely a cinematic universe I'm excited about. It's not Marvel. I don't have to watch 20 other movies to know what's going on in this one. It's pretty simple. You don't want to die. That's it. That's it. You don't want to die because you're going to come back, and you're not going to be you when you come back. So don't die. But yeah, so I really enjoyed this. I thought it was really well done, and I'd be interested to know your thoughts. Again, I'm sorry for the scratchy voice. I hope it's better by morning, or else it's gonna be scratchy all day tomorrow. Because there's two games on tomorrow, so I'm gonna be doing a lot of video stuff tomorrow. But hey, thank you guys so much for all your support. I also want to say that the video I did yesterday about depression and everything, I'm glad that resonates with people, and I hope that people who have subscribed to this channel stick around, consume the content on this channel. I do intend to, now that the hockey season isn't 20 games a night, at least it feels that way sometimes, I do intend to watch more movies, watch more series, do more reviews of things on here. My dream has always been to be able to make more content for this channel, see this channel really grow, and not have necessarily as much content on the hockey channel, and maybe more focused, couple of videos a day kind of thing during the summer. That would be the dream. I'm not there yet. But at any rate, let me know your thoughts about the movie if you saw it. If you haven't, I hope I haven't spoiled it too badly for you, because if you stuck around for the spoilers. But yeah, what a movie. What a movie. Really, really well made. Really well put together. And I want more. I want more of it. I hope that we get more of it. But let me know your thoughts. Like I said, hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And let me know your favorite kind of horror movie to watch. Let me know your favorite horror movies of all time kind of thing. And how you would rate the Evil Dead movies if you've seen the ones that I just mentioned. Evil Dead the original, 2, the 2013. It's been called a reboot, but it's really not. And the new one, Evil Dead Rise, and then Army of Darkness in the middle too. Where would you put that? Let me know your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for all your support. It means a lot. I will talk to you again soon.